Alright, welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at Druid cards for the Great Dark Beyond. I play a fair amount of Druid. I like Ramp Druid, even though it's not fun to play against. It is, it's fun to kind of, in a meta when, it might be very aggro, being able to ramp up fast enough to still get to be able to kind of play a more control-y deck can be very fun. And then alternatively, just ramping so that you have so much mana that you can easily deal with stuff is also very interesting. Doesn't look like there's a ton of ramp-specific stuff in this Druid pack in this expansion, but there is some very interesting cards. So let's get into those now. First up here, we got Ulu, the Ever Drifter. This is a 5-mana 6/5 beast, and its effect is each turn this is in your hand, gain 2 random choose 1 choices. Now, I looked at this and I was like, what the heck does this mean? If I had to guess, it's pulling from every other choose 1 choice available in either standard, wild, both, maybe some other random things that they've chosen. It doesn't give any indication of what those choices could be, so it's a little bit hard to evaluate. But if it is any choose ones, here's all of the choose ones in standard right now. So we have stuff like, gain an amount of attack or armor equal to the cost of the card, which I don't know how they would actually fit that into it. Deal 2 damage or summon 2 1/1 saplings. Draw a beast or discover one, discover a minion or discover a spell. And then as you go up in mana choices, or mana in general, you got like discard 2 cards or destroy one of your mana crystals. If it does pull from every option, that's actually like a really bad one to potentially get. Then you got stuff like this: summon 3 5/5 ancients in 2 turns, or 8 giants in 4 turns. Do I think this is good, though? It's interesting. Theoretically, so on the turn that you draw this, it doesn't get anything, right? It's, you have to wait at least a turn for it to gain some choose 1 choices. Then when it does, it's random each turn. The big problem with random each turn types of cards is that you might have a turn where it's like, wow, those effects are really good, but I also need to do something else this turn. Like, I need to drop something that's, going to deal with my opponent's board, and this draws me 3 cards, but it doesn't actually do anything to my opponent's board or whatever. Like, there are situations like that. Because it's 2 random choose 1 choices, you could potentially also get a really good one and a really bad one, or a really good one and one that doesn't really do anything for you. But because it's 2, that means you might get one that you really like, and that's good enough, I guess. I don't think this is that great, if I had to guess. I guess the thing is, if there's enough control-y archetypes for Druid, which I think there could be, throwing this in as I'm just going to keep this in my hand until it's relevant and then drop it whenever I feel like. If you can wait 5 or 6 turns to drop this, you probably get an advantageous effect at some point during that. But if you have to drop this and you only get like 1 or no good effects for it, then that's pretty bad. Now, granted, most of the choose 1 choices are relatively strong, or at least pretty neutral. I wonder actually if transform into a 7/6 with rush or a 4/9 with taunt would be an option, because then that would just destroy it would change your legendary into one of those things, right? Yeah, I don't know. If it's choosing from all these effects, some of them are very specific. Other ones could be pretty alright, though, I guess. It's definitely interesting. I don't see this one being extremely pertinent, though, but who knows? It's hard to say with random stuff. Next up, we got Cosmic Phenomenon. This is a 5-mana arcane spell, and I'm actually going to talk about arcane more in a second, because I want to go to the other legendary quickly before I talk too much, but let's just talk about this one. Summon 3 2/3 elementals with taunt. If your board is full, give your minions +1/+1. I read this and I'm not 100% sure if the second part of this effect takes effect after the first part, or if this is kind of a mutually exclusive thing. I would have to imagine it's if you have 4 minions and you play this, it gives you 3 2/3s with taunt, and then gives all of your minions, including those ones, +1/+1. So it would turn into 3 3/4s, and then whatever else you had on your board already having +1/+1. And so long as that's the case, this is like really, really strong, I think. Druid has a lot of ways to get low-cost minions onto the board if they want to. It's not been like a common archetype recently, like generally like Dragon Druid or some ramp is kind of prevalent right now, but token and, you know, treant and all that kind of stuff, like you can get some sticky minions onto the board. And so if that's all the case, then this is a good way to just burst out some damage and protect those minions in addition, because they're 3 3/4s with taunt. Like basically every other card that has a secondary condition, if you're playing this just for the 3 2/3s with taunt, it's not as good in my opinion. But let's really quickly also look at Exarch Exarch Othar. This is a 4-mana 3/3 Draenei. Battlecry: if you're building a starship, get 3 different arcane spells and reduce their cost by 2. There's a weird kind of pivot for, not weird maybe, but there's definitely a pivot for Druid to arcane style spells going on right now, or in this expansion. Not right now, but like, yeah, when this expansion drops, every spell that Druid is getting in this expansion is arcane, which is quite interesting. There's actually, where is it? The other starship piece. Yeah, here it is. This starship piece is also related to that. 3 mana 3/3 Starlight Reactor is the name. After you cast an arcane spell, recast it, targets chosen randomly, and it's a starship piece. So there's obviously some kind of pivot towards arcane spells, meaning that anything with the arcane tag becomes moderately better. Like thinking about playing Starship Reactor into Cosmic Phenomenon gives you 6 3/4s, and then the Starship Reactor itself becomes a 4/4. So that's pretty strong on turn, you know, whatever, 8, I guess. So yeah, I think it's worth just looking at some of these combo pieces when we're looking at the arcane spells, just because I think that it makes them better. And actually you can even play Starship Reactor into Final Frontier, which is another one that we have to look at. So I'll get back to these guys at the end, but I just wanted to kind of point out both of these before we go through these arcane spells, because it's worth noting their effectiveness. So because of those, I think Cosmic Phenomenon is really good. Even in general, just without those, I think it's still pretty good. But yeah, like Starlight Reactor makes Cosmic Phenomenon like really, really strong on turn 8. Next up, we got Final Frontier. This is a 7 mana arcane spell. Discover a 10 cost minion from the past, set its cost to 1. Now, the reason that I point out, you know, Starlight Reactor, realistically, actually, here's the play, right? You play Starlight Reactor, Cosmic Phenomenon, potentially 2 times in a game. If your opponent clears both of those, you now have a ship with 2 Starlight Reactors. Probably get this other starship piece onto it as well, which is Shatari Cloakfield. 2 mana, 1/3 starship piece. Elusive, your first spell each turn costs 1 less. So, like I said, presuming you can get all that kind of set up, what's the play? No, that doesn't even necessarily work out. I was going to say you drop your starship and then you play Final Frontier, but you still can't actually... No, I'm not... I'm thinking as if Druid ends at 10 mana. Druid ends at 16 mana now, so it's fine. All this stuff is just doable. So the play is, at any time that you want to. You could realistically do Starlight Reactor into Final Frontier to get 2 10-cost minions from the past with 1, like they cost 1, which is already really strong. But if you end up in a situation where you can play a fully decked out starship, so you know the 5 cost for both of like this effect twice and this effect twice, and then drop Final Frontier, which would only cost you 5 at that point, you're now getting 3 10-cost minions from the past that cost 1, which you could play all of if you've done any of the ramping stuff, like the New Heights or whatever, which is like really, really strong right now. Either way, this feels pretty good, but Final Frontier's probably only, like, obviously you could just play it like just Final Frontier, and it's not like it's bad necessarily, although From the Past is such a weird keyword, but it is Discover as well. It's not like it's just anything. So you get more choice, which means you probably get a pretty decent option generally. I think Final Frontier is very strong as well. Like, I'm thinking potentially even just at turn 8, I guess, I would maybe just play this without any additional stuff, because a 10-cost card from the past could be strong enough to kind of deal with a situation that I've got, but then the added value from other stuff could make it even better. Let's talk about Astral Phaser. This is a 2-mana arcane spell with a choose 1, deal 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions, or make 1 dormant for 2 turns. Dormant for 2 turns, dormant for any amount of turns, is very interesting because it's kind of, it's not like a silence, but it does, like, it reduces, if something has buff stats, it puts it back to like a neutral stat line when it comes back, right? Now granted, it also heals it back to full, I think, if it was lower. But that can be pretty useful against specific archetypes. So that's pretty decent. And 2 turns is a long time. If it's like a big taunt, you can like invalidate a potential block and just get lethal off of this. 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions on turn 2 could be fine. But I feel like you probably play this more for the 1 dormant for 2 turns in like a control-y deck than the first effect. Maybe I'm undervaluing 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions, but that doesn't feel very strong comparatively to me. Once again, it's an arcane spell, which means that you can double it with Starlight Reactor, although, yeah, targets chosen randomly. So on something like that, I'm actually not sure if it's targets chosen randomly, does it also mean the Final Frontier you don't get to choose your Discover? Interesting to note if that's the case. But for Astral Phaser specifically, 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions is already random minions, but that means you're doing 8 damage total. Versus make 1 dormant for 2 turns, you would make 1 of them dormant, and then if they've got like 3 other ones, 1 of the other ones is randomly chosen. Interesting. I'm actually also not sure how this even reacts. Does it choose one of the 2 choices randomly? Like if I cast Astral Phaser, deal 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions, and I've got a Starlight Reactor on the field, does it guarantee that I'm going to get another 2 damage to 2 random enemy minions? Or is there the potential that it makes 1 dormant for 2 turns? Because, I don't know. That's an interesting kind of interaction, and I'm not positive how it actually plays out. Because sometimes things get a little bit wonky when you get into like doubling effects and stuff like that. But in general, this is probably alright. I don't know if Control-y Druid is like incredible, but I could see it seeing play for the dormant effects. Okay, Starlight Grazer, 8 mana, 8/9, or 8/8 beast. Elusive, taunt, and spell burst. Give your hero 8 attack this turn and gain 8 armor. Interesting. Spell bursts are a one-time thing, but that does mean you can essentially attack into an 8 attack minion, not for free, but like, you know, you could trade with an 8/8 using this effect. Or you could go face for potential easier lethal. But is it worth it to play this for that? I think that the cost and stat line is too high and too low. a little bit, but it is elusive and taunt. Elusive and taunt is a fun combination to deal with because it invalidates a lot of the like, oh, I'm just gonna get around your taunt by doing, you know, this thing or whatever, right? Like, I'm just gonna hit your taunt with a fireball, which by the way isn't really even happening anymore, but stuff like that, you know? I'm gonna turn your taunt into a random minion that costs one less or whatever, right? That is invalidated by this. Now, it's not actually invalidated by field-based, you know, spell effects. So if there's a mass evolution or de-evolution or whatever, then this still gets affected by it. And a lot of the, like, more bursty stuff, like the Death Knight, you know, deal 1 damage for each corpse. This would also get hit by that and probably die to it, and then you just used 8 mana for basically nothing. But because it's 8 mana, you could probably pretty easily activate the spell burst on the turn that you use it. Meaning, if you just need 8 mana burst to the face, or sorry, 8 damage burst to the face, you get it for this. I don't see this being all that great though, personally, but I could be incorrect about this. It might be like Beast Discover fodder, potentially. I'm confused a little bit by it. I don't think that it's that great. Next up, we got Arcanite Revelation. 1 mana arcane spell. Draw a card. If it's a spell, it costs 1 less. I mean, Arcane Intellect. Half of an Arcane Intellect effect, but for an additional effect on it on top of that, and less than half the mana cost. Seems pretty good. I mean, 1 mana draw a card is already kind of like on the verge of just being playable if you wanted. Like, it's not like it's unbelievably good, but like in decks where you want to just draw through them really quickly, or to get to your key combo pieces or whatever else, like, you know, this seems like it's an easy include. Obviously, if there's like an exclusively spell-based Druid deck, this is like even better. But even if there isn't, like, I think the draw effects are generally really good. It's worth noting as well that you can double this using Starlight Reactor, which just makes it better. But I think in general, this is pretty good in my opinion. Next up, we got Shatari Cloakfield. This is a 2 mana 1/3 starship piece. We already kind of touched on this, but I'm just going to quickly talk about it. Elusive, which the elusive effect will then pass on to your starship itself. Your first spell each turn costs 1 less. Pretty good effect. Elusive being passed onto your starship, I could see you running like at least 1 of these or 2 for consistency. It's bad when you drop it, but then maybe it isn't, because if you play it on turn 3, you could play it and then a 2-cost spell for 1. I think this is probably good. It's really hard to say with starship pieces because there's a lot that kind of goes into the whole process, but this feels like it's probably pretty decent to me. You know, reducing the cost of spells long term, as long as this sticks on the board, and then once you get your starship down, as long as that sticks on the board for more than 1 turn, you're getting decent value out of it. But if there was a starship piece that was not going to be played, this might be it. I guess passing elusive onto your spell, their starship is pretty decent though. Distress Signal. 4 mana arcane spell. Summon 2 random 2-cost minions and then refresh 2 mana crystals. This seems broken to me. Even better if you can play it right after playing Starlight Reactor, because you've literally played it for free and you get 4 2-cost minions. This is, you know, I was talking in the Death Knight video about like, oh, you know, this is broken, this one potentially needs a nerf. This just reminds me of, what is that stupid mage spell that they printed that like refreshed your mana crystals if you drew a certain spell? It was like, Water in the Desert or some stupid thing. It was in Showdown in the Badlands. It's a mage spell, not a choose one. This is looking at Druid cards, even though I switched this to mage. Hello? There we go. Is it not in Showdown in the Badlands? Badlands. It's the one where there's like that guy that looks like he's dying in the desert. Maybe it wasn't Showdown in the Badlands. Which expansion would that have been in? Is it Titans? It's kind of weird that it's not. Anyways, you'll probably all know which spell I'm talking about anyways. It had to be nerfed actually kind of long after it came out, but yeah, basically people would just play it for free every single time because it cost 4, and it would, because you were playing like all spells in that deck, I think it would restore 2 mana for each spell that you drew or something like that. You would just get that back every time, so you were playing a spell that gave you stuff for completely for free. Now granted, there is actually a Druid, I think it's a dragon in Druid that you get to play for free on 4 as well, I think, actually. And that hasn't been nerfed, so... But I think this is pretty strong. I think this with Starlight Reactor is very, very, very good. I guess we'll see if I'm correct about that, though. Next up, we got Exarch Othar. We already talked about this a tiny bit, but let's just quickly go over it. 4 mana, 3/3 Draenei with a Battle Cry. Because it's Draenei with a Battle Cry, you can double it with a Velen, which is just worth considering in all Draenei cases. Battle Cry, if you're building a starship, get 3 different arcane spells and reduce their cost by 2. This seems like a good control option overall. And because if you're building a starship, that means you've probably already got Starlight Reactors on your starship, which means you get to potentially play arcane spells that you would want to be doubling anyways for less when you eventually put down your starship. So this seems like, you know, all the pieces kind of come together into one cohesive thing, and the starship package with this guy is pretty decent probably for Druid, if I'm understanding everything correctly. And then lastly, we've also talked at length about Starlight Reactor. I think this is probably another one of like the best cards in Druid in this expansion. Recasting, you know, getting that amount of value out of any spell is going to be good. They've obviously put in enough arcane spells in this expansion that are half decent at least, that it'd be worthwhile. And just for the record, here's all of the arcane spells that are currently available to Druid. So one additional one that we didn't talk about is Sleep Under the Stars, which I think is being played in almost every Druid deck at this point anyways, so there's more value. Play Sleep Under the Stars twice. Pretty good. And you can do that on turn 10 if you want to. So yeah, the Druid package overall seems very, very strong to me in this expansion. I'm excited to play around with it. I think that there's the potential for a couple cards to get nerfed. I don't know exactly what they're thinking with Ulu. It feels like the weakest card potentially of the Druid cards that I looked at, but I could be incorrect about that. Let me know if you disagree with anything that I've talked about here, and yeah, I'll put out another one of these, looks like tomorrow. Have a good one, everyone.